Hi, I'm George. Welcome to GMakes, and this is the overview for November days 5 and 6, Oceanic Wonder. You can see my final render right here. I have this, like, not really Cthulhu, but like this weird mystery creature with some tentacles flying all over the place, and this little submarine going. And that was just what I ended up on. I had a couple ideas for what I kind of wanted to do before I landed on this submarine, and then I was like, ooh, let me put a creature in the background. And so now I have this little creature, which you can see it kind of textured over here. Untextured just looks like this weird blob with some dots up there. But this is fully procedural, so everything is using geometry nodes and procedural textures, no images or anything, and then a little bit of compositing, but all within like the node workspaces. So again, the shader workspace, the compositor, and geometry node. So I don't have any modifiers or anything like that, or even any like keyframe outside of using the geometry nodes, like keyframing these, but I don't like move it using G and like move it in the 3D space. So all that said, and of course the lights aren't geo nodes, but they are technically procedural because they're not an HDRI or anything. They're all within Blender itself. So yeah, I'm just new this quick overview, not really a tutorial, but just look at my process and what I did to create this weird creature and this little submarine. So speaking of the submarine, so you can see it's all connected. It's all one thing. Speaking of the submarine, we're going to start with that because it's the only one I really have organized down here. So you can see it's pretty straightforward. It's not too complex. I know you weren't going to be really seeing it up close, so I didn't need to put that much detail into it. So I started with this Bezier segment, or really I started with this curved circle. Is what I started with, which if I just select it, you can't really. Oh, it's right there. So you can see there's the curved circle, and then I added a Bezier segment, which made it a curve to mesh, which gave me this thingy right here. And this thingy right here became the actual like top and bottom of the segment because I've got a curve line, again, right there, which then I moved around and then turned that to resampled that into a cylinder, basically. And just instead of using an actual cylinder, just give me a little more control. I could kind of scale a little bit easier. I just liked working with the curved line to mesh. And then I basically took this line, I re-instanced it to 2 points, instanced some points on it, and those points happen to be, again, this curved circle to mesh with the Bezier segment, which looks like this weird balloon thing. But when you join those together, you get this tube with a cap on the end, and then just how I managed to get this Bezier, you get this little like almost propeller looking thing, and I was like, that's sweet, because that's what I want, so I don't have to instance another thing. So that was that, and then I also have this, and then I do have a cylinder down here, and then I deleted some geometry. I deleted the top and bottom of it, and then I extruded it a bit just to get a little thickness. So you can see there's a little thickness now to it if I go from here to here, and then I changed it, and then I rotated it, scaled it, all that stuff, and then I joined it together with the base of my submarine. So then you get that little round bit, which is what you see on like submarines to encase the propeller. So from there, I also added a couple other things. So then I set a material. You can't see because I'm in material mood. I'm not in material mode right now, or shader workspace, whatever it's called, developer workspace. But then I have also this icosphere, which I moved around, and then I've also gone ahead and joined up, and that's this little one, really tiny right there. Let me actually go to that colors right there. And then what I actually did for that is I wanted it to kind of blink. Instead of controlling the texture, because I'd have to make another texture, animate that, and I already have that texture used for something else. So I got a little lazy, but also made more work for myself. I just did I used the scene time, I used the seconds, I used a snap, so it snaps to an increment and doesn't go in between. So increment of 1. And then I did a ping pong, so it would bounce back. And it works pretty well. It starts off and turns on and then does a little bit of flickering, but like in a pattern, which is what I wanted. So worked out. And then I have my two materials, my ocean sub and the ocean eyes, quote unquote, but really it's just this little blinking thing. And then lastly, as I kind of went through this, I wanted this thing, I wanted a little bit light at the top. For some reason, like my spotlights weren't working and stuff, so I just added uh, this little cone. Or this is a different one. This is what I was trying to do that I didn't use. So I initially had this cone that was gonna be at the edge and look like a searchlight, because my spotlights weren't working for my volume. But then I eventually just went with this cone, which is just shrunk it real down, set the material to a glow, and then it adds just a little shininess on the tip of the submarine. And yep, and then I used a transform to rotate I want, and then this one animates it, just moving a little bit along the y-axis, left to right. So that's the submarine, pretty straightforward. Oh, I think I missed though. This little top bit right there is also pretty straightforward. Uh, that is which one is that? It's this one up here. So this is just another cone that then I transformed and then connected up and then rotated. So again, not too bad, just to get that little bit of like the top of a submarine going. All right, so that's the submarine. Pretty straightforward, pretty great. Again, compared to the whole scene right here. So the next thing is the big rock guy. And that is starting with a cube, which then I subdivided it, and then I triangulated it, and then I dual meshed it. And I also did a random value for triangulate, so it only chooses certain ones to turn into triangulate. And then I extruded the mesh as a whole mesh using different scale sizes for X, Y, and Z just to get the look I wanted. And then I took that, and then I used a mesh boolean with this thing up here. And this, again, is just a cylinder that we transformed, subdivided, triangulated again, dual meshed again. And then I didn't extrude this one. I set position to get these weird little crags. And again, noise texture to control the strength, the multiply to kind of control the strength. And then use a mesh boolean with the kind of rock, the cube as my base mesh, and then the cylinder being cut out from it to get this little like cave thing. And then I set the material as ocean rock, and we'll get to materials in a little bit. And then I subdivided it just to get a little smoother. I wanted a little bit of that crease though. Like rocks have hard edges and like they crease. They're not always round and smooth. And then that was it. So then I had my nice little cave of creepy wonders, I guess. And then lastly, I have these little floating eyes for this bit. And this was pretty simple. I just used icospheres. 1, 2, transformed one to go to the next to it. So I got 2 icospheres. So this one transformed, and then I have joined them together. Transform them to get their scale. The reason the scale is highlighted here is because they animate opening and closing essentially. So you can see they're gone. And then the z-axis scales up at a certain point, whereas it happened right there. And that's just so I could have it being like opening and closing its eyes. And then those go through a set material, which is just a glowing material and emission texture. This is an Eevee. And then I have this transform. And this transform is kind of fun because I, again, add the scene time with seconds to the translation because I wanted them to bob up and down. So it's just along the z-axis. Yeah, so here we go. So it's just along the z-axis that they're bobbing up and down. And here, actually, I think I can be able to show this if I just do that. Yeah, so you can see they're bobbing up and down a little bit. I really like it. They just kind of slowly bob up and down. And that is going because I have this divide, the scene time dividing it. So this controls the speed of it. So you see it's very fast. We don't have that divide. And then I have this ping pong, which lets it bounce between two right now. Because right now it's just rising up. Because it's as the scene frames go higher, the z-axis will go higher. So on this ping pong, I wanted to limit it, so I just messed around with finding where I want it to bounce back and forth between. And then I divided that as well because it looked like this. It was very big, so this gave me even more control. And then I added it because it reset the position down there, so I wanted to add the base value of where I wanted them to sit within the cave. So then again, that gives us this nice little, once it gets through, because it's still animating the sub and everything. Waiting for these frames to be used. But you can see they open, and then it will start to bounce. Just a little bit. It's very subtle. It works in the larger render. But I don't know. I was really happy with it. And then that's pretty much it. So then those all connect together to get the sub passing in front of this weird creature thingy. And then this stuff up here, that's nothing. This up here is all just for my light. So it's all for this. I have a spotlight up here. And then this thing right here is a BOGO, I believe is the right term for it. But just to give me some of those God rays, because if I go here, you can see I have these God rays. Look at that. I could have also animated that too. I didn't think about that. And also I was running short on time, so I just left it still. And I think it looks pretty great either way. But basically how this BOGO works is I have my light, which is just a spotlight. So there's the grid. And then I transform that, move that up. And then I distributed points on faces. And then I instanced on those points this wibbly wobbly tiny little grid, which is nowhere. But to get these like weird shape looking thingies, distorted it just a little bit. And then I rotated them kind of randomly throughout. You can see I have a random value for the scale and I have random values for the Z rotation to get this little bit. And then just combine that up to get the gobo for making those God rays when we go through. And the reason you can see those God rays, this will be my... So that's the overall idea of the main base for this. And the reason you can see the God rays is texturing, which we'll get to in just a little bit, after I go through my last thing for modeling, which was the tentacles in the back. Little tentacle guys. So those tentacles, again, are pretty straightforward. So I'm actually going to hide the main cube, and we're just going to look at the tentacles. So the tentacles are actually pretty straightforward. It's just a method that I really like. So again, look at this, pretty simple. So we start with a group input, and this group input is a curve. So that means I could go in and I could draw them. If we tab into here, you can see they're all curves, and then I could draw the curve I wanted, which is something I just love doing. I love that about geometry nodes. So then I subdivided the curve. I subdivided the curve to get it a little smoother, because without this, I guess it works pretty well. But I subdivided it, it helps it get a little smoother. And then I set position. Let's see if anything this actually helps. What is going on here? There we go. Got stuck. I set position, so we got this fun little bit. Resampled the curve, reversed it, because the animation... Give me something in my throat. The animation for this looks like this because I have the scene time, which then is being divided. Again, if you don't have the divide, it just wiggles every scene. And then that's going through, that value is going to be, the scene time value is the seed essentially for a noise texture, which is pretty big. And then because I'm setting position, I had to use a subtract. And then I also scaled that because without that multiply, it looks like this, which is nice, but really subtle. I want a little bit more, so I had to multiply. And then the set position is what gives it that wobbly. Without the set position, nothing happens. Resample the curve. If you don't resample the curve, nothing too bad happens until you start to get to down here, which is curve to mesh. So I'm going to pause that animation. So I have this curve to mesh. And if we don't reverse curve, again, because I'm going from the base to the tip, that's how I draw things. So I like for that reverse curve. Resample, you see we just lose a little bit of that detail and that nice stuff up there. And if we don't subdivide, it becomes really smooth. And I wanted a little bit more of those craggly bits. Not too many, but a little bit. So how's this working for the curve to mesh? So I have a set curve radius, pretty straightforward. That is set a circle, and then I have a scale as opposed to a divide. Just for this time, I decided to go scale. Again, then I have this spline parameter, which is controlling. So let's see, actually, if I delete all these, this spline parameter is controlling the length, and that's very large. So we go the length, we put that through a divide, which is still huge, and then I use and then I decided to, so we have to scale it again, essentially. But in between ththose two scales, we have an arctan 2, which really reduces it down. I'll unscale this one. And this is to scale it back up a little bit. And that Arctan 2 just gave me the right look I wanted for this kind of slight curve into, but not a full like cone. So that's why I use the Arctan 2. I just experimented. That's one I like. And this is the scale I liked. And then that went through, and then that went through my materials to get this bumpy looking weird slimy thingy. And so, speaking of materials, here are my procedural materials for all the things in this. We'll start with the tentacles since that's where I am at right now. So to tentacles, ocean tentacles. This stuff doesn't mean anything. It's really just these, not even that, but it's these ones. So we have, again, this is pretty straightforward. We just have a principled BSDF. Roughness is pretty shiny. I also put up the specular because I wanted those little glints on it. And then I got a bump texture with a noise, or a bump node with a noise texture going into it. And that is set to the object so that it sticks to the object, and also the scale's a little more, fits the thing a little bit better. And then that's just scaled and detailed, and the strength on the bump, how you use a bump texture. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, I went with this kind of reddish purpley color. And then if we bring back our rock, our geo nodes, there's a lot in here. So we'll start with my ocean. Can I have ocean rock? So this is the main rock texture. Again, pretty straightforward. I got a Musgrave texture going to the bump, and then into the normal. I have this as full strength because I want this pretty deep. And I messed with that Musgrave. I got 0.8 was the size I liked. And then I have a color ramp here. And again, this Musgrave is going to the object texture coordinates. And the color texture here, just so I could control with the color ramp, the brightness spots, the dark spots, all that jazz. To get this weird craggly rock looking thing. So it looks maybe like a brain. I don't know. But yeah, that's it. That's pretty straightforward. Again, nothing too complicated. And then I have things like ocean lights, which that one I didn't end up. Oh, that one I did end up using. It's just an emission texture. I have just down there as opposed to this one for some reason. Ocean lights again, another just emission. Yeah. So that's. I mean, a lot. Ocean eyes is just a red emission. Ocean glow is just a blue emission. And then the last kind of interesting one is I have ocean sub, which is for the submarine down here. Which again, I made it metallic. Roughness pretty high. Another bump and noise texture to the object coordinates. Pretty straightforward. You get good looks from one kind of simple method. And then the last thing is if I go into my world to get those God rays again. If we go here, get those God rays and this little bit of haze and everything. We have a principled volume. We have, a background, I have no light coming from that. But then, and I have it set, it's kind of a dark bluish green. And then I have a principled volume connected to my world output. So I don't have to use a cube. Ooh, I don't know how that sounded, hit my microphone. We don't have to use a cube or anything to get this volumetric kind of shading, whatever you want to call it. I just use the world, and if I cut that off, you can see we lose all that nice, and we even lose the blue-green because that's the background color that the volume's kind of parsing through. So that's it. That's pretty easy, and then animation, yeah, was pretty straightforward, keyframing, or just using the scene time, frame time. The last bit is compositing. Again, all node-based. You can see I have a lot of stuff here that I went through and experimented with, but didn't actually using, so I'm actually going to delete all that. But so here's the flow. We have our base render, which looks pretty good to begin with. And then I have an alpha over. And this is to get that background. So you see it rendered blank and it rendered as blue, but I wanted a little bit, or like the bluish green, but I want a little bit darker. So I have an alpha over to get that background. We can delete this gamma. So alpha over. And then I set the exposure just a little bit. Again, no exposure. This is going to be much darker. I wanted to brighten up some of the bits. And then I don't think this color balance is actually doing anything. Again, I experimented a bit, but I didn't like how anything looked. But I do have a hue saturation value right here, where I just mess with the factors a little bit, because you can see it's pretty dark, and I want a little more of that blue color. Again, a brightness contrast, again, I wanted to up the contrast a lot, and dim down the brightness a bit. And then I go through here, and I have two glare nodes. So I have just a fog glow basic. I do have, I'm an Eevee, and I do have bloom turned on. But I also wanted to add a little bit more in post. So, especially for like the sunlight little bits. So I added a glare. fog glow, and then I also added the streaks, which you can see. This was a bit just stylized, like this isn't necessary, but I like how it looked, especially when the eyes fully open. And then lastly, to give it a little more of that ocean look, I added a lens distortion. There we go. So that's how the render actually goes. But adding a lens distortion in the negative way, so it's really like shrinking it down and adds a little bit of that wibbly wobbly factor. Again, that's it. That's pretty straightforward, pretty simple compositing, nothing too complex. Just experimented a bit. And that's it. So that was the node overview for November days 5 and 6, Oceanic Wonder. Hope you enjoyed this like little overview. Hope you're enjoying this little series. If you haven't watched the previous two, go ahead and watch those. These will be coming out for every render I do during Nodevember 2022. If you enjoy this and want to see more things like this or any tutorials or weird video things I put out, please subscribe, like the video if you did, and if you have any suggestions for other prompts, things you'd like to see from these in the future or as I'm going forward, leave them in the comments below. All right, well, take care. I'll see you next time, and peace out.